I'm throwing in the towel, Krabs. All these convoluted plans are getting us nowhere. And to top it all off, I'm the only one who's taking the heat.
What's that supposed to mean?
I don't see you on the front lines. Sure, let me do all the work, while you just sit back like the fat gorilla you are.
Who you calling a gorilla, you one-cent, one-eyed bottom feeder?
Mr. Krabs, if you want a kelp shake, why don't you just buy one?
Cue the intro!
Ahoy, mateys, and welcome aboard to the only podcast that believes if you're going to keep your enemies closer than your friends, you might as well make frenemies out of them. I'm ready, a SpongePod Squarecast. I'm your host, Captain Eric, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here as we continue our sail through the 4th season of SpongeBob SquarePants. And today's episode, Best Frenemies, yeah, add that to the list of episodes of this season that I could tell you the plot. I've seen it before. If you would have found me in public before I rewatched this episode and said, hey, Captain, do you know the plot of the episode Best Frenemies? I'd go, yeah. It's about Plankton, Mr. Krabs, the Kelp Shake invasion. But that's where it really would have ended. I would have said, decent episode or something along those lines. No negative thoughts about this episode, but I haven't watched it in so long. So going back into it yet again, add it to the list of episodes that upon rewatch, I've enjoyed thoroughly on a whole other level. I feel like that's been the overarching part of this season, which season 4, I don't think anybody has ever really soured on season 4. In my history of talking with other SpongeBob fans, everybody deems the first 3 seasons as the golden era, as it should be, and there's nothing wrong with season 4 kicking off the Silver Era, or the Silver Age, going by the DC comic book way of labeling their different eras. But there's nothing wrong with that, and I feel like when we see that little bit of a dip going from, gold to silver, we associate season 4 with maybe a few other seasons down the line or a few other episodes. I feel like it just might get lumped in with a few of these other seasons where, you know what? For coming off of 3 of the greatest seasons of animation in television history and the theatrical film, Season 4 is a pleasant experience. It's a wonderful time. I honestly do not feel like it's not talked about enough. For that achievement, for being able to steer the ship without Steven Hillenburg, to be totally honest, I think the ship he built and the river it's on, the ocean it's on, I just thought of river because I really feel like that ship is on a straight line. It's really hard to mess up that trajectory. But I feel like those who took over the duties after he left and any of the holes that needed to be filled, they've done a great job. That's all I'm saying. Is that not that we should take down those 3 seasons higher than we talk about them. They deserve to be talked about as high as we hold them up. But season 4 definitely deserves a little bit more love out there. Today's episode is Best Frenemies, the second half of the 78th episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. Like our previous episodes, premiered on DVD before premiering in the United States on television. The Season 4 Volume 2 DVD housed the first airing of this episode in the United States, but it had its premiere elsewhere around the world as early as November 18th, 2006. But it premiered in the United States on television on March 31st, 2007. It was storyboard directed by Zeus Service and Eric Weiss, who wrote this episode alongside Danny McCauley. Our animation director is Alan Smart. Our technical director is Vincent Waller. And our supervising producer is Paul Tibbett.
Yeah!
Right out of the gate with a title like Best FrEnemies, I have to imagine that most fans out there would immediately assume that this episode is centered around Mr. Krabs and Plankton. Because although they are at each other's throats most of the time, there have been moments before the eventual confirmation that they were once friends. But even throughout this rivalry, there have been moments that they have been able to kind of put everything to the side for the sake of having fun. The Fry Cook games, for example, or the times that Mr. Krabs goes over to Plankton's to play poker, goes over to the Chum Bucket to play some card games. You know, play games with the guy who is trying to consistently break into your business to steal your formula. I'm going to go play cards with him. Of course, more of this onion of a story would unravel over time, but this is one extra step to that story, is the inevitable idea that a competitor would come into the Bikini Bottom landscape of eateries and really put it to Mr. Krabs enough that even Plankton would want to step in. But before we get there, before we even notice the kelp shake phenomenon going on in Bikini Bottom, Mr. Krabs is in his office noticing that the profits are down for the Krusty Krab this month. Something is up. For some reason, people are not coming to the Krusty Krab. Profits are down. Now, I have to imagine that every single fast food establishment out there has months throughout the year or specific times where they anticipate less people going to their business. And they may try during those times to introduce products that would entice customers to still come through, even though the time of season or the weather may change others' opinions of that fast food establishment. They may still anticipate profits being down for whatever reason. And in the world of capitalism, when profits are going to go down and you know it's going to happen, well, you have to mitigate that any way you can so that the things you know are going to dip, you have a way so that the profit can then level up. It can maintain itself. Hey, you were still more profitable this month than last year. Way to go. You always have dips and ups and downs. The downs are inevitable, but then you have to do what you can to make sure that the next go around you don't have the same downturn, and then you have something to constantly stick your thumbs up to in the world of profits and capitalism, and it is where Mr. Krabs lives and breathes. I've even seen Mr. Krabs being used in some investment commercials, which now that I'm saying this around open microphones, my phone, I'm going to get bombarded with them more than I already am as a SpongeBob fan, but I can't believe that a character from SpongeBob SquarePants is being used for a service like investing, being used to promote a service so adult. It makes me feel old. And I know that that's inevitable. I know, but it's all about the characters that I grew up with and how they're used. I've always maintained, and this is me opening up a little bit here on the podcast. Sorry to diverge for a second, but I think I've only ever said this to my brother, and it's been during visits to the casino, where if I ever one day walk into a casino and I see a character that I grew up with on a slot machine, I think I would immediately walk out. And not out of anger or frustration or anything, it just would be out of shock. Like, whoa, I gotta get out of here. A Dexter's Lab slot machine, okay. Where's the exit? Oh, Ed, Ed, and Eddie, where you match up the jawbreakers. I'm out of here. Oh, goodness, and there's the Reptar slot machine with the giant projection of Reptar. You know what? I have $5 in my pocket. No. I gotta go. Legitimately, though, it's something I've had in the back of my head. It's going to happen at some point in time. There's going to be a character of my era on a slot machine, and I'm going to have to just eat that it's my time. That's the end of the road of where those characters can finally get their final last dollars. Slot machines where people go, oh yeah, I don't want to call out any character right now and make anybody feel bad, but there are certainly newer characters like The Simpsons who end up on slot machines. That really isn't that insane of a thought, or Batman, but there are characters from yesteryear that you don't see anywhere else on any other pieces of merchandise used in any other way other than any time I've gone to a casino, I've seen a slot machine with these characters I'm thinking of on them. And if you've ever been to a casino, I think you can at least think of one or two of them. But I hope that never happens to any of the Nicktoons or any of those cartoons, if you know what I'm talking about. When Mr. Krabs walks out of his office, he notices that everybody in the Krusty Krab is indulging into this kelp shake. This green bottle is in the hands of everybody except for Squidward, who is the one character who usually isn't a follower in these kinds of trends. At some other cases, Squidward is on top of the trend, but in this case, when it's food-related, he's usually not one to run to the nearest line to buy whatever drink or food everybody is running to. Even SpongeBob SquarePants himself has a kelp shake. We missed the entire arc of SpongeBob getting into the kelp shakes. We've led up to this moment where Mr. Krabs makes a decree that I'm surprised he didn't already have in order. But the fact that he's been pretty lax about this thus far is interesting, and certainly a plus-up for the Krusty Krab. But Mr. Krabs yells out to everybody, no outside food or drink allowed. And instead of throwing out their kelp shakes and staying at the Krusty Krab and eating whatever burgers they're purchasing, everybody leaves. Which on one hand, on the capitalism side of how to handle this situation, I understand. Hey, if it's something we already sell, somebody shouldn't be bringing in a competitor's product. I get that. But then on the other side of things, all of these customers still are purchasing things on the menu. And if the demand is this high, where these kelp shakes are so superior to what you sell that people are willing to not even enter your location, then you have to do something drastic. Not as drastic as what Mr. Krabs eventually does, but you'd have to change something up in the business. Either your own kelp shakes or your own rules. That's all I'm saying. Mr. Krabs leaves the Krusty Krab and he runs into a kelp shake establishment on its own, a building that is shaped exactly like the bottle itself. And seemingly, from the way it's framed, it's well done at the beginning of this episode. It makes it feel like this is all a business of Plankton's doing. They make you believe that the kelp shake that Mr. Krabs runs into was in the spot of the chum bucket, and that this is Plankton's new business. I honestly wish that was Plankton's plan. It would be smart of him after a few years of the chum concept not really catching on and not being able to capture that Krabby Patty formula. You just change it up. Change it up to something easy, something smart. Kelp shakes seems to catch on well. I have to say, I was really proud thinking that this was of Plankton's design. I'd love to see him succeed in a different venture, as in New Leaf. A knick-knack store? Cool. Go on with that. As Mr. Krabs runs into Plankton, he's relaxing right next to the Kelp Shake restaurant, which seemingly is right next to the Chum Bucket. And as Mr. Krabs calls out Plankton for his newest fraud or scheme, whatever he was trying to blame Plankton for exactly, Plankton plays dumb at first, and we get this little bit of a gag where he gets up and has no idea how the Kelp Shake restaurant was built seemingly right behind him as he was relaxing outside. He played it off as this was the first time he's even seen it, which I'm not saying he's lying, but I don't know. I don't trust Plankton 100%.
Trust me, I'm like a smart person.
Now, at first, at the thought of a single restaurant coming into Bikini Bottom and giving Mr. Krabs a run for his money in terms of business, I would think that Plankton would be on the side of that, would want to cheer that on. But then again, if Krabby Patties are not going to work against this other establishment, this other restaurant, then what's the point for Plankton? He has not only every reason to team up with Mr. Krabs against this restaurant, but as they notice, when they look over the landscape of Bikini Bottom, there is more than one Kelp Shake that has opened up in town. There is a Kelp Shake on every single corner, 2 on the same street. There are Kelp Shakes right next to each other. And I would say that nationwide, probably worldwide, this is an allegory for probably Starbucks, I'd imagine. But if you're from the New England area, I could easily say Dunkin' Donuts. And I think most people would go, yeah, that sounds about right. Where you could look out over a New England town and see, oh, look, a Dunkin'. Oh, another Dunkin'. Oh, there's 2 Dunkins right next to each other. How did that happen? And I actually have an answer for that, which may inadvertently give an answer to how Kelp Shake has spread across Bikini Bottom so rapidly. And I have no idea if this is the rules or the laws across the country when it comes to franchising. But at one point, I spoke to somebody within Dunkin' Donuts about franchising, not for myself, but it was just inquiries about the process. And kind of to get the answer as to why there are so many so close to each other. But apparently at the time when I spoke to this person, they told me that when you sign up to franchise a Dunkin' Donuts, which does cost money out of your own pocket, the idea is after a year or 2, you then have to find a second location. And then after a year, find a third location. And then after another year, find a 4th location up till you have 5 locations under your belt. That is the franchisor's contract. So that's why in some places in New England, I think for at least Dunkin' Donuts, you may have so many Dunkin' Donuts close to one another. It's for these contracts that the franchisees have to fulfill. For Starbucks, it may be the same exact idea. Hey, if you're opening up one Starbucks, well then, you're going to have to open up a few others. Maybe not exactly 5. That was one person telling me one number around one area of New England, so it could be different across the board, but either way, usually if you're franchising a business, you're not always running just one. You're trying to open up a few others and have these all running concurrently with one another, and then it runs as a machine, generating you profits, the company you're working for profits, everybody's happy. So this could be an idea where there are franchisers in Bikini Bottom, people signing up with Kelp Shake to open up locations in Bikini Bottom, and they are just going rampant. This is a new business, and you can find it literally everywhere, and it is sucking the business dry from the Krusty Krab as much of anybody sucking on these kelp shakes or trying to get that last drop. Mr. Krabs and Plankton embark on a quest to take this business down. What I really liked is not only does Plankton have a reason to help out Mr. Krabs due to the sake of proof that the Krabby Patty secret formula is no match up against this new kelp shake, but also with all of those new restaurants in Bikini Bottom, what chance does Plankton have at this point to get anybody to try something from the Chum Bucket when there's already a Krusty Krab, when there's already a Chicken Shack, I think it was, when we have Shake Shack in town. I was thinking of the Shore Shack for a second, but that's probably somewhere close to the shores. When you have all of these options, what chance does Plankton have at this point? When there was only 2 or 3, it was manageable. But now when there's 50 plus of these things growing in his town, you might as well make friends with your enemy. Or the old saying is, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's one saying. And the other one is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And in this case, when there is a restaurant chain overthrowing the town and nobody going into the Krusty Krab, you can understand why Plankton would team up with his sworn enemy. And it's really nice to see. This may be up there with one of my favorite Plankton Mr. Krabs episodes. It's really funny to see that right as these two team up, they immediately stoop to Plankton's schemes of stealing something from another restaurant. They need to know what's inside of these kelp shakes as to why it would make all of the citizens of Bikini Bottom go nuts for these shakes. So instead of just buying one, they have to go and steal one through ridiculous schemes that include ridiculous contraptions. And I love each and every one of them because this is all Plankton knows. He doesn't understand the concept of walking in and buying the product. For some reason, he can't legally buy the thing. I feel like if he knows in the back end he's going to just be stealing their recipe anyway, I might as well just steal the product. I don't think he can do one and then the other. That's the problem here. And I think that's hilarious. I genuinely think that's funny that since he's going to be doing something wrong to achieve the product, he also has to achieve it in the wrong way. I absolutely love it. And he drags Mr. Krabs into this whole scheme as well. So they enter the Kelp Shake restaurant for the first time, and their whole scheme is to shoot Plankton into the kitchen through Mr. Krabs sneezing, which, hey, it gets the job done in terms of getting Plankton where he needs to go, but I feel like at Plankton's size, he could honestly just walk into the kitchen without anybody noticing him. And by Mr. Krabs sneezing all over the place, including, and it's only caught for a second or two, but we have a chance to look at the glass food case of the Kelp Shake restaurant. So we get to see a little bit else of what they sell other than shakes, which is across the board pastries, cookies, cakes, croissant.
Croissant.
I feel like I could do that better. Croissant. There we go.
Croissant.
With all of the pastries they're selling, I know that it's a little bit more calorie heavy than what you would see at a Starbucks. But Starbucks still sells a lot of cookies, cake pops, croissants, pieces of bread with icing on them. So, no, they're pretty up there in the calorie department as well. So maybe it's not cakes in bulk, but this is still 1-to-1 up there in line with Starbucks. As Plankton was sneezed onto the window of an employee's only door, an employee comes through, sees the grease of the sneeze and Plankton, doesn't necessarily notice Plankton as a living being, which is precisely my point as to why I knew Plankton could probably just walk back there without being noticed. But this guy sprays him in the face with lemon cleaning spray as he cleans up the window. Plankton at least is lemon scented, which I have to imagine, even though this episode was made after the movie, canonically, the movie takes place at the end of SpongeBob's story, becoming the manager of the Krusty Krab 2. And at the beginning of that story, Plankton finding Plan Z, one of his big, exciting exclamations of finding this plan was that it was lemon scented. It's lemon scented. He's been sprayed in the face with lemon spray probably more times in his life, so he knows the joy of that lemon scent. Maybe it all started right here with this guy spraying it in his face. I would rather have lemon sprayed in my face than pepper. That is the absolute worst. Not that I've had it full on, but from seeing it, from the slight after effects of being around it and seeing how it stings, yeah, pepper spray is no joke. Lemon spray will leave you smelling nice, but you should never have that in your eyes. Don't really spray cleaning solution on yourself. That's not something I recommend, but lemon as a smell is very nice. So if you have cologne that is lemon scented, not saying it's the worst thing in the world. People like citrus. For pirates and those pirate affiliates out there, we are certainly advocates against scurvy. And the one way you can do that is to keep fruit around you at all times. So spray a little bit of that lemon scent on you, you're good to go. A little bit of that Plan Z. Ooh, that's a good one. Some Plan Z lemon scented cologne. When it's your last plan leaving the door. Oh, I forgot one thing. Honey, my Plan Z. Oh, that sounds terrible now. Anyway, back on track. If you can't steal something during the day, you might as well try at night. Plankton and Mr. Krabs put on their ski masks. Not the first time that either of them have attempted something devious at night, although Mr. Krabs is in a different... Actually, Mr. Krabs has actually dug up a body. Smitty Warbin Jaegerman Jensen. And although Plankton did steal King Neptune's crown at night, only thinking up to this point in the series, not considering the movie, who do you think has been the more devious character at night between the two, Mr. Krabs or Plankton? There are certainly evidence for either one to have pulled off more shenanigans during the late hours of the evening. But if you happen to be watching this episode on YouTube, let me know in the comments below, youtube.com/@thecaptaineric. But if you also are listening to this episode on Spotify or watching, as there is a video option as well, there is a poll that I can change week to week. So that's an interesting question I will throw for today's episode. Who, up to this point in the series, is more devious at night, Mr. Krabs or Plankton? Because either or certainly have some rough patches on their shenanigans during the nighttime.
I call shenanigans!
As our two wannabe burglars pull up to the Kelp Shake, each of them have their own means of breaking into this restaurant. Plankton, of course, goes straight to science. He built a bionic arm that with one press of this button, it's going to pull the handles right off of the restaurant's doors, giving them access to all of the kelp shakes they want. After the button is pressed, though, nothing that bionic arm does is helpful other than smacking around Plankton, something he probably deserves a little bit here and there, which he certainly gets a little bit of a physical comeuppance in this episode, but he certainly is the comedic foil for a lot of these plans. Mr. Krabs, though, he's all about being old school, old-fashioned. He pulls out a crowbar. Mr. Gordon Freeman here trying to break into the Kelp Shake restaurant, and when that fails to work due to the fact that they actually have a watchdog, but even more worse than that, SpongeBob SquarePants is just standing off in the distance next to the watchdog, just looking in on what's going on. The joke of shoehorning SpongeBob into a scene of an episode where he's not the focus, but in this way, it's one of my favorite SpongeBob jokes in an episode where he's not involved. Maybe that's a stretch of trying to find a way to say that this is my favorite of any moment, but thinking about that, thinking of episodes where SpongeBob takes a back seat but then is still shoehorned in for a joke, this has got to be up there. Of all characters, we don't even have to question why SpongeBob at night is just standing around in the streets of Bikini Bottom watching whatever's going on. He's a character that you can place in any situation, and because of his personality and the things he's into, there's never really going to be a question when he's going to come up with the most innocent answer anyway. So as he's watching these two, he's wondering, what are you guys doing at night? Wait a minute. If you're enemies, why are you working with one another? Mr. Krabs and Plankton come up with the idea that the whole reason that they're messing around with this door and that they're working together is that they've actually started a side business and they were hired to fix the door of this kelp shake. And SpongeBob buys it. I really enjoyed his appearance in this episode, although they were short, they were meaningful. SpongeBob was there to help showcase how popular the kelp shake had become. Once we see his character with the kelp shake, we know it's in full overgrowth over Bikini Bottom. After that, though, this part of the episode, it's a nice way to get more SpongeBob out of it, but an even more clever way for Mr. Krabs and Plankton to kind of play off of the fact that they normally wouldn't really be doing this. And then, of course, during his final appearance of this episode, continually plays a pivotal role regardless on taking a back seat during this episode. When Mr. Krabs and Plankton now have the clear of SpongeBob, they go to the roof of the kelp shake, where I have to say Rocco would be proud of Mr. Krabs' jackhammer skills, which I have to say, of all of Mr. Krabs' old school, old-fashioned, hey, let's go head first, brute force, directly into this business with the crowbar and then the jackhammer, I do think the jackhammer at night isn't the smartest idea. People are going to hear a jackhammer at night. It's not necessarily the quietest tool you can use in a given situation. A little bit of a tidbit of information here for those that don't know. The whole Rocco mention is of the character from Rocco's Modern Life who had a love, a hobby, if you will, of jackhammering. It was an art form for the character, and he was one of the best riders of a jackhammer you could find in the world of Rocco's Modern Life. Mr. Doug Lawrence and Tom Kenny, two voice actors you should be very familiar with here on SpongeBob SquarePants, were both heavily involved with Rocko's Modern Life and creating those wacky characters on that show. Mr. Lawrence, Plankton, playing Filbert Turtle, SpongeBob, Tom Kenny playing Heifer Wolf, and Rocco being played by Carlos Alazraqui, one of my favorite voice actors, one of my favorite little voices that one has been able to create. The voice of Rocco is just, it's up there with like a bliss kind of sound. It's a sound wave. I can't explain it. I just love that voice. Steven Hillenburg, our beloved creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, worked on Rocko's Modern Life and created these friendships and these working relationships with people that would eventually lead to SpongeBob's creation. So it's always great to give a call back to Rocco there anytime I can. There is a threat of the security system. I guess the jackhammering was enough to set off whatever security Kelp Shake has going on, but a speaker system comes through the roof as Mr. Krabs is jackhammering, warning them that spontaneous combustion would occur, which I have to sit back and question, if you know it's going to happen, is it really considered spontaneous?
You sure about that? You sure about that? That's why?
Of course, Mr. Krabs gets off the roof just in time as Plankton is zapped with a laser. Kelp Shake means business. There is certainly money behind this chain of restaurants. As we get another montage of sorts of Mr. Krabs and Plankton going through various ways of trying to steal a Kelp Shake, and Plankton ending up on the rough end of the situation. What was really interesting, though, not to bring up another Nicktoon here, but when Plankton and Mr. Krabs were in the inside of the vents of Kelp Shake, going through and sneaking down using a rope and letting Plankton kind of Mission Impossible himself down, it really reminded me of one of the first episodes of Cat Dog, or the first episode, where Cat Dog, after being banned from Taco Depot, are trying to break in so that they can enjoy the all-you-can-eat taco buffet. And that episode is one of those classic, anybody can watch this is awesome Nicktoons. So it's ingrained in my memory, and just seeing Mr. Krabs and Plankton in the vents of this restaurant that they're not necessarily banned from, but the fact that they're trying to indulge into this restaurant in their own way, it just reminded me so much of that episode of Cat Dog. It gave me the same vibes. Similar shots of the way Plankton was being dropped down. Plankton actually goes through one of my nightmares, almost being swallowed by a creature whole, which it's a good thing that at my size of a human, there aren't many animals that could do that to me. But at Plankton's size, yeah, that's certainly a situation you have to watch out for.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
Back at the Krusty Krab, Plankton and Mr. Krabs are licking their wounds over all of these failed heists, although Plankton is the only one with any visible wounds over their situation. They're thinking to themselves, at this point, what else can they do? When Plankton mentions one of my favorite lines of his up to this point of being tired of taking the heat, which it's just a little bit of verbiage I wouldn't necessarily expect to be used in a SpongeBob episode, but here we are, and I have no idea, it's not even that bad of a phrase, taking the heat, but it's a bit of vernacular. It's a piece of slang that I wouldn't necessarily assume to be in a show like this, and then here it is. Oh, that's really funny. I don't necessarily audibly laugh, but I find it funny that Plankton says something like that. I wrote it down. He calls Mr. Krabs a fat gorilla, and Mr. Krabs only takes offense at being called a gorilla, not the fat part. I think he completely accepts that and indulges in that. He's fine with his body. He can't change that. And he also knows, as we've seen, what happens when he loses that fat outer shell. He has that soft underbelly, so he doesn't take that for granted. SpongeBob comes up with the most ingenious idea in the world, which is to just buy a kelp shake. If you want a kelp shake so bad, simply buy it. And Mr. Krabs and Plankton, they don't delve into why they have such reservations for this idea. For me, as I've already explained, I think for Plankton, he's already going to be doing something devious on the other end of that purchase. So for him, why even waste the money? You might as well just go all in on the negative part. For Mr. Krabs, though, it's buying something? What? You're crazy. Get out of here. You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Krabs doesn't spend money. And even after finding out that this kelp shake that everybody is going nuts for only costs $1, even that is too much for Mr. Krabs to hand over. It's literally a struggle for this guy to hand over $1. And you'd think with even that information, Mr. Krabs could change up something in his business, like changing the price of their own kelp shakes, but who knows? With the way the menu changes in that restaurant, it could be out of season and not even being sold at this time at the Krusty Krab. They get the kelp shake, and in one of my favorite little moments of the season, we have to pause this once again. I don't think Mr. Krabs has ever been in Plankton's lab before. Not of his own free will, being here on friendly terms. It's certainly interesting, isn't it? It's certainly interesting in that they're doing what Plankton wants to do with the Krabby Patty all the time. Ever since the first season, this machine has been able to have matter dropped into it, and Karen is able to dissect and detect any ingredients and is able to then list them off. So it's interesting to have Mr. Krabs here for one of these occasions where they're doing it together. They want to find out what is in this kelp shake. What is everybody going crazy over? And come to find out, the main ingredient within the kelp shake is simply kelp juice. That's it. Kelp juice. Nothing more at first. And after Mr. Krabs and Plankton have tasted this kelp shake, with Mr. Krabs not liking it at all, or just seemingly confused as to why simple kelp juice would rock the world as much as it has. Plankton, though, likes the aftertaste of this drink, which is not unheard of. I, myself, have loved the aftertaste of certain things that most people do not like. There is a mint flavoring for Dunkin' coffees that they bring around sometimes, like a mint chocolate, that has a chalky aftertaste with the chocolate that I genuinely enjoy. But most people around that time of the release of that flavor hate that aftertaste effect. And I'm someone, I don't mind it. I've never had a kelp shake, but I may align with Plankton here and his assessment. And even after Plankton mentions the aftertaste, Mr. Krabs starts thinking about it a little differently, which is something that has happened. For anybody that has been around someone who has tried like a new soda that may have a mystery flavor, when somebody says something that changes the way you think about a flavor and you have that moment of realization, like, oh yeah, that's what Mr. Krabs has when Plankton brings up the aftertaste, tastes the kelp shake again, and this time, well, Mr. Krabs actually likes it a little bit. And then Plankton gets a little sip. And they're going back and forth before Karen wants to slow them down. Whoa! There is another ingredient you two should know about. And before Karen can even get that ingredient out, Mr. Krabs and Plankton are already out on their way to get more kelp shake.
I want more, Guardian!
There have been a few sly references to some classic horror movies that I have to imagine are not coincidences. And I feel like a few of them have come from the writing team here of Eric Weiss and Zeus Service. So this is another little reference of a deep cut that I wouldn't be shocked if it wasn't at least the basis for this episode or one of the things they wanted to do and found a way to put it in. But what I'm talking about is a classic 1982 film called Creepshow. It's an anthology-type movie, kind of like Tales from the Crypt, where they would have different shorts, or Twilight Zone, different segments, where this movie would have different segments of creepy, scary stories. One of them being the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill, who Jordy Verrill being played by the legendary author himself, Stephen King. I'm not joking about that. Stephen King in a movie playing a character who comes across a meteor landing in his field, this poor farmer coming across this meteor thinking it's going to change his life for the better. And when he comes across whatever goo is inside of that meteor, it starts overgrowing his body with grass, and it starts covering him in moss and grass, and it's growing on his walls before eventually, spoiler warning, he is engulfed by nature in his home, and he's stuck there, and he's alone. But he is covered head to toe with grass, so when SpongeBob runs into frame, covered head to toe in this mossy substance that grew all over him, which is clearly an after effect of all of the kelp shakes. It just was a reference I knew with everything I've seen thus far. These are fans of horror movies right here. I would be willing to bet on it, but other than that, we start noticing that everybody in town who has ingested the kelp shake is starting to grow this grassy, mossy substance on their body, and kelp shakes themselves are being shut down, and whatever toxic substance was being used in their shakes other than the kelp juice, which, by the way, we never find out what it is. Karen never tells us. There isn't a word as far as what they were using, but they were putting some other toxic chemical in this shake to make it irresistible, and it backfired. And just as Plankton and Mr. Krabs notice everybody else being engulfed by this grass, they themselves start growing it on their bodies. They are covered head to toe in this mossy substance, with Plankton growing a little bit of an extra hairpiece on his noggin, with a lot of people online looking at that and immediately thinking of Albert Einstein, which I don't think you're wrong, but after seeing that hairstyle and noticing some specifics, I have to feel like it may be connected more to the lead character of the anime Cowboy Bebop, Spike Spiegel. Not the Netflix version, but the original version of Spike. Something about that hair, it's so iconic. And the way Plankton has his. It reminded me of Spike before Einstein, but I can see the Einstein comparison, especially with Plankton having such a college-educated brain. Of course it's going to cause more hair to grow on his head. After they freak out, Plankton immediately just goes right back into wanting to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula. All of the kelp shakes are being shut down, and something in them just click in this situation. Plankton goes right back in, opens up the safe with a Krabby Patty in Mr. Krabs' office, which is really interesting that it's not the formula itself, but it's just a Krabby Patty sitting in his safe for some reason. Is that the burger that they siphon the formula from every day? I have no idea. But what's really sweet is after this entire episode of them working with one another, finally coming back into some normalcy, Mr. Krabs gives Plankton a 10-second head start. This has a lot of Tom and Jerry vibes in those episodes where Tom and Jerry kind of put their differences aside for a second, and then when things settle down, they kind of wink at one another and they slyly go back into the swing of things. I enjoy that. It's a little bit cliche and cartoony, but after having this episode, all of the years that these characters have been at each other's throats, it's nice to have a little bit of a moment like this, where even if Plankton knows I'm not going to get away, it's just the thrill of getting back into the swing of things, back to some normalcy, these restaurants going away, we're finally back at each other's throats, something they're used to and therefore something they're comfortable with, even though it's, still Mr. Krabs and Plankton chasing one another, stealing things. Either way, I like the end of this episode, and genuinely, I enjoyed this episode. It is up there in the pile of episodes that I watched when it premiered. I enjoyed it then. I didn't think of it in any sort of negative light in the years following, but I certainly didn't retain the enjoyment I had for it right out of the gate, and that's why I avoid watching episodes of SpongeBob. I can't wait to get to episodes of SpongeBob that I legitimately have not seen, which is okay. I don't walk around trying to be the biggest encyclopedia of SpongeBob SquarePants. He means enough to me in my life and my soul that I don't need to have the biggest knowledge of the character. I don't need to have the biggest collection of merchandise for you to be told how much he means to me. And as we go on, I'll collect more merchandise, I'll watch more episodes, the encyclopedia here will go on. But as far as this episode is concerned, for today, I don't have a ranking system as of yet, but this is one of the highlights of Season 4. For me. If you've been watching Mr. Krabs and Plankton for all of these years, they certainly have had episodes dedicated to their wants and desires, and episodes where they are at each other's throats. But to have an episode like this, where a third party comes in and naturally just runs amok through Bikini Bottom, and then for the outcome to not even be anything that Mr. Krabs and Plankton did on their own. They just had to sit back and let the kelp shake brand itself spontaneously combust. And that, ladies and gentlemen, of the Ready Crew is going to be this week. And I'm ready, a SpongePod Squarecast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming aboard and joining me on this week's episode. If you are still listening at this point in the podcast, well, you are part of the Ready Crew, whether you like it or not. So make that official by heading over to youtube.com/@thecaptaineric or click on the link in the podcast description below and click on that subscribe button. That's all you have to do to be a part of the Ready Crew. If you would like to follow the Captain on social media, you can do so on Twitter @I'mReadyPodcast and on Instagram @SpongeBobPodcast. If you would like to support the Captain, of course, joining the crew and subscribing on YouTube is the best means you can do so. But if you would like to go the extra mile, you can click on that Redbubble link in the podcast description below, where you can find a multitude of different pieces of art that were all designed by Captain Eric that you can put on any kind of product you desire. Anything that comes in from my projects go directly back into my projects, and it is always appreciated. I understand the value of one's time, one's attention, and each and every one of you who check me out week in and week out have my heart. I love you guys. Thank you for being a part of my life, because I would do this for a crowd of one, but having so many of you out there join in and join me is a blessing. So I do not take that for granted, and your time is precious. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for joining me. And until next week, as always, please stay safe. Be kind to one another, even your worst enemy, in some semblance. And come aboard again to another episode of I'm Ready! A SpongePod Squarecast.
Hey, wait a minute! Plankton!
Come to Papa.
Hold it right there! You're not going anywhere! Without a 10-second head start?
It's good to be home.
You said it!
I love being hated.
Hey, get back here, you little booger!